You're all very welcome, guys. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Gar. A
Very
pleasure.
much.
I'm going to start by talking to Christine and Joe a little bit, and then I'll bring the guys in. But one thing, firstly, congratulations. It's a stunning film. I saw it quite a while back and rewatched it the weekend, and like it was haunting and it stayed with me until then. But I think it's fair to say it's become even more and more like relevant and pertinent. In a lot of ways, it's an intriguing exploration of identity, like quite a lot of your work, I would argue. But I suppose it also kind of deals with male violence, which sadly in the last week here in Ireland with the Ashling Murphy case has been brought to the fore much more. I know you began the journey of this film like 6 years ago, you were saying, and it wasn't the same kind of culture we're living in now. But if I could just ask, like, where the idea and the, I suppose, concepts you were interested in exploring with this came from and how that came about. Christine, maybe we'll start with you.
There's a number of different threads and things that we were thinking about back in 2013 when we had our very first discussion about, well, what would we like to explore in our next film? And we had made 2 feature films by then. The first was called Helen, our debut feature, and the second was called Mr. John. But there was aspects of the central character in Helen that really intrigued us, aspects of her journey, which in our film Helen is brought to a very particular point. And, you know, we're still curious about the character and, you know, her world and delving into that again. And so that was in our mind, the character of Helen. And then in my mind was a story that had been recounted to me many years beforehand by a friend of mine. And we were in Dublin walking back from some strawberry picking in in North Dublin, where Finglas, where we lived and grew up, used to join some country roads. It doesn't anymore. It's obviously, you know, just hugely developed and lots of housing estates there. But in a way, we lived on the edge of Dublin and the suburbs, and we lived almost at the beginning of the countryside. Anyway, we were walking home, and I reckon I was about 16 or 17, and my friend recounted a story about an auntie of hers who was in England and in a pub and was being harassed by a man, and came out of the pub and walked into a police officer and explained to him what was going on. She was really upset, and he said that he would walk her home. And on the walk home, he attacked her and raped her, although he's a police officer, and she was left pregnant as a result of that rape. And I don't know, at that age, at 16, hearing a story like that, it didn't really make sense on lots of different levels. Maybe I hadn't really thought about the idea that a crime like rape could lead to a child being conceived. And my friend's auntie actually went on to have her child, a boy, but nothing ever happened with regard to the man who attacked her, the father of her child. You know, she didn't go to the police thereafter. Anyway, so that something stay in your mind. I know when we were at college, we were often told to notice what you notice, but I think there's also pay attention to things that stay with you and don't go away. So there's always something that you're thinking about or comes to the surface. And, you know, for me personally, they were 2 of the things that I was thinking of. The other thing I was thinking of was an unpublished novel written by a friend of ours called Joanna Pocock. And her story was about a young woman who goes to find her mother. So it's a road trip across America, and she goes from the east all the way to Las Vegas, where her mother is a waitress, and the mother doesn't want contact with her. So 3 things that were on my mind as myself and Joe did what we like to do, and we're trying to develop a new project, which is to do a lot of walking and talking. So we would have these recurring walks from our flat where we live here in London, down the Regent's Canal, ending up at the Thames, and just try and talk a lot before we ever start writing. Joe, you could probably pick up from there or add.
Well, you know, I think that kind of gives a certain basis
to what a foundation is. I guess the only thing I would add to that is that in any endeavor to try and make a film, you know it's not going to be quick, and you're always in for kind of a lengthy journey. And so I guess in addition to how you want to express the film, the other important thing, which goes to make up the two halves of storytelling, is the content. And because you're going to be with something for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, 7 years, in reality, that's the average. It's got to be content that moves you and you feel passionate about, and you feel that it's meaningful to you. And I think, as you, Gar, just mentioned earlier on, that sadly has not abated one iota, this ever-growing tension and misogyny that we experience shockingly and frequently. So in one sense, that's an important thing to us, to have the film express something meaningful for us. And I guess that was another starting point for Rose Plays Julie.
Very good. I'll come back to that shortly, but like just to allude to something Christine mentioned there was like about Helen, and I suppose that's also about a girl trying to find her birth family, and identity seems to be a recurring theme of yours. Like obviously Mr. John with Aidan Gillen as well, he has a different identity over in Asia as well. And I'm just curious, when you were talking about your process of like what intrigues and what you're going in, is that something like you look to explore in your films, or does that just seem to come out of what you kind of, the different mix you put in? Like, or is it like, let's, you know, identity is one of our auteur's kind of signatures at this stage, or does that just come out of your work?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you have any psychology training, but we may have to be psychoanalyzed for this. So I think it does come out of maybe something innate, or something that maybe has developed as we've grown up. I mean, for example, we did move to an art college in the late 80s from Dublin to Devon in the southwest of England. And I think a certain transformation happened there up to a certain point. And so we do think about the kind of versions of ourselves that we left behind. I know I've mentioned before that, you know, my mother had a history of bipolar throughout the 60s, 70s, and sadly right up until the moment she died. And it's interesting to watch somebody who has a mental health condition and the kind of transformation that they go through and the other person that they become. And I guess from a very young age, from the age of 5, 6, you kind of watch somebody that you know and love change into someone that you're not sure about or scared of. And I guess this also leads to a certain fascination with how volatile we are in terms of who we are and how prone we are to change. So I guess they might be two examples of why we continue to be fascinated with this idea of who we are and how stable we might be and what other kind of lives we might lead. Yeah, I don't.
And as Joe said, that when we left Dublin and went to Devon, we went to this art college and we studied theatre. One of the big questions in the college that we went to with regard to acting and performance was the difference between the two. So it's something that intrigued us to think about performance as opposed to acting, to think about character, to think about role playing, to think about the different ways we present ourselves and play roles every day in our lives and in different circumstances. And for example, myself and Joe coming over from Ireland, that idea that you can have a bit of a clean slate to present yourself to people the way you want to, because they don't know who you are, they don't know much about the country that you've come from, etc. So they were questions that were always in the air, which then bleeds into the way you think about how you want to make the work that you're going to make. And that interest, I think, in role playing and stepping into people's shoes. So seeing something from a different point of view and a different perspective, and either because there's a sense of identity under duress or a desire to see something from another perspective or a point of view, we're drawn to those stories. If I said that one of our favorite films is Vertigo by Alfred Hitchcock, maybe that makes sense.
Very much so.
You know, it's a film that we come back to again and again because, yes, it's in, you know, at the heart of that is an exploration about performance, role playing, identity, taking on different identities. And then there's a real mystery at the heart of Vertigo as well. It's a thriller, so it allows a space for, you know, the other things that interest us, mood and tension and atmosphere, to, you know, be part of the mix as well, because we studied theatre, but our love has always been cinema, and we thought a lot about narrative when we were studying in Dartington College of Arts in relationship to performance, live performance work, and how stories are structured. And again, not taking them for granted, or not saying there is one way of telling a story. So that's also intrigued us, and we brought all of those elements into our approach to making film, which we kind of vaguely did accidentally because we were making community art projects in the UK when we stumbled into making our first short film. And you know, and it's also how we made our first feature film, because that was also an art project. It wasn't a, you know, a kind of a typical film that's made within the, you know, the industry model. It was made as an art piece, a community art piece, but ended up on a cinema screen and being distributed. So that all felt pretty accidental and not purposeful, but we were, you know, obviously really glad that that's the journey it went on. So I guess we come at things, this sounds really crap, and I'm almost afraid to say, we come at things in our own way, basically. And we've tried to stay true to that in terms of how our, you know, work has developed over the years.
I think that doesn't sound crap at all. I think that makes perfect sense, because you clearly see in your work a sensibility coming from the creativity, which I imagine, and I don't want to speak for Orla, and that as an actor, when you get a script like that, there's just so much to get your teeth into. Before I talk to Orla and Anne, you have a wonderful cast across this. I'm just wondering how you settled on like Orla, Anne and Aidan, because like I literally can't imagine any other three people playing it, the roles at this point. And I know you've worked with Aidan before on Mr. John, and he's had a cameo pop up in other works of yours, but how did you go about casting this?
Yeah, I think Aidan, I mean, we were looking for somebody like Aidan, and then we thought Aidan would be pretty good as a like Aidan. So we kind of, that seemed pretty obvious. I guess Anne and Orla was different, because then that meant going through a process of casting, which we did with Emma Gunnery as the casting director, which, to be honest, was sort of, it's not something that we had really done much of before. And that was an interesting process. And so you're reliant on people like Emma to bring you ideas, which she did. And I think, you know, we went through a process, and the process was to some degree about auditioning, particularly with Anne, and then on the other, with Orla, on the other hand, it was a conversation, actually. So, and I think often the best way is about having a conversation, about an understanding of the ideas and the script and the intention. And so they were two different ways of finding people. And I think, you know, it's a bit of a dark art, this casting. So you have to kind of half imagine somebody playing a role. And I think for us, it was fairly straightforward once we talked to Orla and then talked to Anne, that they would be perfect for these particular parts, in the way that we didn't have to do much thinking with Aidan. We'd had already, that thinking was already done. But yeah, it's something that they say you've got to get that right. And it is true. Casting really is critical. And because we're also going to hand over this project to people that we want them to own themselves and interpret their own way. And so Orla and Anne would have very clear ideas about how something might be played. And you would go with that, because you need to listen to people to make sense of the scene as they play it. And that's where you need to kind of be very attentive to the actor.
But that gives us a nice segue into Anne and Orla. I'd just like to welcome again, because just what Joe was saying there about, like, you guys would obviously engage with the text in your own way and so forth. So maybe starting with Anne, I suppose, what was it in the script that like appealed to you, or that you found interesting in the first place?
Well, I think one of the first scenes I auditioned, I auditioned for over tape. What didn't actually make it into the film. I was talking to, I think, a therapist or something like that. And what did it do? Yeah, it went into Rose's thought process around her idea of being adopted, like what could have happened. And she's speaking in these kind of hypotheticals is what I remembered. And I really liked that because it was just a well-written insight into something, I think, a complicated mindset. So like she'd be saying one thing and I had the freedom as an actor to play a few of my own ideas as well, because sometimes I feel like in auditions or in certain scripts, you don't have enough room to bring your own psychosis to it or something. But I feel like with Joe and Christine's writing, it's very you can I don't know, you can infuse it with ideas, and it can work or not, and they would tell me otherwise, but very clearly they would throw things at me and I'm joking, but and then in the one-to-one audition, it was a scene with like Aidan in the recall. It was supposed to be a scene with Aidan when she meets him and she has the wig on in the museum, and I liked the fact that she was able to face this colossal creature, not hypothetical, but like this creature in her life, this cause of her spawning, if that does not sound nice, but she faces him and she kind of plays with him in that way, and she's after something, and she's trying to recreate something, or she's trying to probe something in him, and I really like that for a young woman part. I feel like I've not come across something like it, so I think that's what I loved when I was auditioning for it. When I was doing it, it was I don't know, I think it was very immersive. I didn't feel like I thought I was consciously thinking throughout. I felt like every scene was approached with Joe and Christine. We did rehearsals beforehand and talked everything through, but day to day I feel like there was so much so much new things to be found in what Joe and Christine directed. I thought was and conversations with Orla as well made things new. I think the newness, the script meant that things could always be new, and that was.
I think that's a very good point as well, because I don't think I've seen a character like Rose in a film before, and like I've seen a lot of revenge narratives, but it doesn't seem like she sets out for revenge at any point. It's like you can see her kind of trying to deal with something and it coming together as she goes along. Orla, for you in the role of Ellen, how did that appeal to you in the first place? And as Joe mentioned, you had a conversation as opposed to a traditional audition.
It was wonderfully old-fashioned. It's something very few people do now. It's tape, just all the way nowadays, which there is a point to that, but it usually takes a more sure, experienced filmmaker to trust that a conversation will give them what they need, and that's what I felt that process was. I mean, look, obviously I read it and was dazzled by it as a piece and by the ideas within it, and by this, this central character of that beginning monologue of who'd I be, who'd I be if in this other life if I were this different name and had grown up somewhere else. I mean, it was just very exciting to read that idea. More specifically about Ellen, I really recognized many a woman who has gone through a trauma, of this kind, and certainly the response frequently, certainly in my generation, was to bury it, to somehow try to get by it, not acknowledge that it has affected your life, to just kind of sort of let the water settle and try and make it ripple free and just kind of get on with life, to deny its impact on your life somehow. And that culture is changing, thank goodness, because trauma will always do something or other. It'll work on you inside. I loved that the character was apparently imperturbable, and that when we meet her first, she does something that is very hard, which is the rejection of an adopted child. Now that's a terrible thing to do. I actually know somebody who has been through that, who collapsed in agony that her own mother didn't want to meet her. We never know the circumstances in which she was born or what the mother went through, but for her own mother did not want to meet her, which was awful. So I'm very aware of this is how we meet her. This is the first thing she does, and it's hard. And then I loved that this, look at her with that sweet face, and she plays this kind of and she plays this character that will not give up, that has what my mother would call pig iron, and comes back and is determined to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be there, to be, I am your daughter, you will acknowledge me. And I loved these twin forces coming together, and then the effect they have on each other. It was like a science experiment. So that was the initial.
I think that's a really interesting point you've hit on there, because I saw another film recently, The Lost Daughter, with our own Jessie Buckley and Paul Mescaler, and it was a lot of the talk about that was how rare it is to see like a mother rejecting their children in some way, and like depictions of like motherhood and femininity. And I was struck by a kind of parallel here, even though that's about abandonment as opposed to adoption scenarios here. But it must be, as an actor, kind of really interesting to see that kind of role, which I imagine you don't see too often.
No, and further to that, I mean, I don't know if this is the place to talk about this, but they and Anne, I'm sure you felt the same thing. What they encouraged when they were then directing the piece is they encouraged restraint. And I trusted them at that point, because there was a script I trusted, and we had talked, we had met, we had, rehearsed, we were in a stage where we all did trust each other very much, which was the most lovely way to work, on a very quiet set, that everybody kept quiet, and it was fun, but it was quiet when it needed to be. And it was just a really great work experience. But they did encourage restraint to the extent that it sometimes alarmed me that there wasn't enough expression. I mean, I do know that, the kind of expression of grief isn't necessarily commensurate to the depth of feeling. And I think many actors, and I'm afraid I'm guilty of it, have sort of performed, if you like, or have kind of, splurged out with the grief, where it's kind of like you have to really show the depth of it. And it was fascinating to me that there is a great truth, which is a held in quality, a restraint. It's there, you have to feel it. It has to be there, but held in, not expressed. And that is what they encouraged. And sometimes, like I said, I got a bit panicky about I'm not doing enough, but that's what they wanted, and that is the film they made, and I really love what they've done.
Yeah, I think it's a funny thing where as an actor you do want to, I use the word indulge, but not in a judgmental way, in expressing of feelings, because that's what you want so badly. But I feel like the piece of art that is the film creates this world of like, I wonder, like a purgatory or something. I love talking about this film because it's always different ideas that come to you afterwards, which is strange. But it creates this world, and I feel like it's the atmosphere in which Rose lives, of abstracting herself, that kind of, I don't know, it's interesting to have worked within that, and then to see it happen. I don't know, it's I suppose it just, I think, suited it so well, that restraint and that stillness. And for my character in particular, I really loved being the absorber rather than the projector of anything. It was just absorption and absorption, because there was, I suppose, like a sponge, not being empty, but trying to find its shape, and it just is trying to take in anything to make sense of the lack of ground, I suppose, is what I was trying to say about it.
No, that makes very sense. Like there is like a void there, and it just, you said so eloquently, they're abstracting herself and trying to kind of see what fits. I think I'm going to come back to Christine and Joe about that idea of restraint in a second, but I just wanted to bring in Stephen because, again, the score is fantastic in this, and I think restraint would probably be another keyword for that at times. You'd worked with the guys on Mr. John before. How did you come to be involved with this?
With this, well, again, through my involvement with Christine and Joe, they asked me to have a look at it, and what immediately struck me about it was how incredibly challenging it was going to be to come up with a score for it, because the film is very quiet, it's chill. There's lots of scenes of cameras moving silently through empty space, like underground car parks, up corridors. The characters speak very quietly. So instantly I was struck with the huge challenge, basically a technical thing of how would the music start? How would the music enter a scene? And once it was in, how would you ever get it out? And then the other side of it is, I'm a great believer that music should have a job to do. It shouldn't just be there as wallpaper. Now, in some films that's needed. If there's a car chase, you're going to have car chase music. If there's a romantic scene, maybe in a film, you're going to have romantic music. This isn't that type of film. So I had to really sit down and think about, like, what, apart from that technical challenge of how does music come in and out, what exactly is the music going to be saying? Because what the film is saying reveals itself so slowly. And even what it's saying stays with you after the film. And then inside the film, as I said to Joe and Christine after I'd seen it, I said, this is a film of ideas. There's so many ideas. So what would the music be doing? And I watched the film. I've got a daughter, I've got a wife, I've got a mother, I've got a sister. I'm quite aware of, a lot of the issues facing women. And you look at this film and you think, what this film is depicting has been happening through the ages to women. Women have been attacked and raped and debased and assaulted, abused for millennia. So that started me thinking of this idea that this idea of time, of this kind of, I kept coming to this concept of a dark tsunami of time moving through the film. And then if you look at the actual technical structure of the story of a man who rapes a woman, who becomes a mother, and then he ends up trying to seduce and rape his own daughter, that sounded to me like a Greek tragedy. So that started me on the path, and I thought, okay, maybe the music can be a Greek chorus, a chorus that's off screen, commenting on what's going on, but commenting as in the guise of the gods, finding what humans are doing so amusing, so dreadfully predictable that things never change. And once I hit on that idea, the score switched from oh my God, how is it music ever going to start in this kind of silence scene, to being sonically this huge score. I mean, the score is from a sonic point of view is quite massive. And where I tried this idea for the first time is the scene where Orla is lying in bed. The camera's over her. It's at night, and she is reliving the rape. And I tried some of this idea to score, like dark strings, this low, very low kind of orchestral female voice. And as soon as I played it over the scene, I got chills, because it said what I was trying to say, which is, again, so it wasn't just, it worked on different levels. It obviously worked from the point of view of her character is remembering being raped. So her specific character is remembering this specific idea. But for me, what the score was also saying is, the gods are saying, look at this, another woman, another human woman, another experience like this. So once I knew that was working, then I started to come up with ideas of what would maybe the gods are finding it amusing, maybe they're finding it depressing. And also then when Joe got involved, we come up with the idea of, well, maybe they just lose interest. So myself and Christine and Joe started playing with the idea of the music just stop. So there's a big scene where Anne's character kind of turns up on the set where Orla is playing a part, playing in a film, and then she breaks down in her car. And again, the music is huge. There's a big orchestra. There's a choir, female choir singing in Greek, and then we just stop the music. We just kill it, but not in a kind of clever score way where it kind of reverberates on. We just stopped it as if they'd lost interest. And that kind of brought us on. That kind of worked. There's a scene in the film where Aidan Gillen's character has tried to rape Anne's character, and then we cut back to him standing in the room in the aftermath, and the music is building and building and building, and then we just stop, halfway through the view of him, and to me it's devastating because he's just left alone. This kind of human beast is left alone with the aftermath of what he's tried to do, but it just feels timeless. It feels, how many other men have stood in this position, having done this, faced with their own kind of nature. So from that point of view, it was very exciting.
That's a fascinating way to look at it. And I would never have thought of that in a million years. I'm not terribly musical, unfortunately, but that idea of like I suppose the narrative behind you coming up with that musical structure, as you said, like a Greek chorus, kind of some kind of omniscient, like God overlooking this, and the music is there actually, is quite beautiful, and it certainly reflects what I would have heard listening to or watching the film, but not in any way how I would have articulated. That's absolutely fascinating. And you're right about the silences and stopping, and kind of like back to what Orla was saying about the, restraint and like holding back in. I think it's an incredibly powerful thing in that film. Also, just back to Christine and Joe on that now. On that scene Stephen was talking about with Aidan, and it's kind of cross-cut between the aftermath and the event as it happens, like very resonant of Don't Look Now or Nicholas Roeg to me in general, which I just loved. It's brilliant. Like, the storytelling is there in the editing and all that. To me, is that the way you kind of work? Like, do you have the idea when you're shooting that scene that you'd like that's going to be edited kind of asynchronously on that, or is that kind of something you came up with in the edit?
I wish I could say that that's the way we thought about it. I mean, some things you've got to find in the edit, or you find in the edit, or you film something and you forget about it until suddenly you need it or you're reminded. I think it really came out of a conversation with a member of the development team from Samson Films who produced Rose Plays Judy with David Collins, and Rhiannoch, who is a member of the development team, looked at a cut of the film, and we were working on a sequence of scenes, and it's Rhiannoch who said that she really wanted to go back to be with Peter Doyle after this incident, so that we were with him for a moment. So then you've got to think about what you've shot, and if that's going to work, how do we make it work? And it's just one of those things that you, at different times when we're editing a film, we will show it to people and to get their comments, feedback, people we've been working with, people who we trust, and people who we know are going to bring things to the table that are going to help and move it forward. But it was just one of those things that it wasn't exactly what we were thinking at that moment, but it was just something that was said that suddenly made sense. And, I completely forgot, and I know Joe did as well, that we had shot that sequence of images with Tom Comerford, our DOP, at the end of the day, because it was in the script. But then we kind of tried to rush it at the end of the day to pick up things that we hadn't gotten, because, it was a short shooting schedule. And because of the way it happened, we'd kind of just forgotten about it. And it was the question from Rhiannoch that made us look again to try and, find that material and see if would it even work, which it did, because I think it's just one of those kind of happy accidents.
I think it's a generally stunning scene. Like, it's incredibly arresting. And thank you for your questions coming in so far. But just this ties into what we're talking about here. It's from, and pardon me if I pronounce this wrongly, Gunjan Mukherjee, who says Christine and Joe's films have a very assured, patient, and precise style. But with that, are they open to happy accidents or changes during the making of the film? So sorry, Gunjan, I think we kind of answer that you are very open to the process.
Yeah, I think you've got to be very alive to it. I mean, if you go in with a set plan and you had an image of the scene and it's not going the way you wanted it to go, and you're trying to bend the reality to some fiction that you've got in your head, you will end up in floods of tears every day, because that's really not how life works. And so, you may have thought, oh, it's going to be a wonderfully misty day that day, and it's not. It's raining or it's sunny. So you've got to engage with the reality that you're now here with these people on this set or in this woods, and this is what we're dealing with now today. And so whatever you had planned in the writing, see it as provisional as much as possible. And in that way, I think the metaphor that sometimes we use might be a jazz structure, that it's very thought out, it's very tight, it's very rigorous, and it holds everything. And anything is possible within that. So at least you allow people to play within that, and you allow for a certain level of improvisation in terms of how the rhythm of something might get played. Now, of course, there might be contributions to that, and you think, no, actually, that's wrong. We need to stay with this particular thing. But I think Orla talked earlier about how something played out, and I do recall there is that very important scene in the forest when Orla announces to her daughter, after she talks about the nightingale, that she was raped. And that scene was written in quite a large dramatic way. And sometimes you might write something because it reads well, but on the day, it's not really how you're going to play it. And I think Orla was fairly clear that scene might actually have a lot of silence and be toned down. And we, of course, completely agreed with that. But that wasn't actually our script intention. The script says something quite different. And then there's also the practicalities that the day we were shooting those scenes, because as Kristen said, it's a very short shooting time, 22 days, a lot of time was given over to the dialogue in the car. And so there's a less time to shoot the scene in the forest. And any ideas you have are quickly gone out the window, and you're going to have to pare it down to essentials. And what is essential is the two of these people talking to each other and listening to each other. And, that was not the way it was intended. But you know that if you're listening to people and if you're listening to everybody around, you know how you're going to film. You'll be shown the way, if you will. But as long as you keep calm and hold your nerve and listen to people, then it's going to be the scene that it was meant to be all along.
Yeah,
It's a terrific scene.
I just wanted to also say that you need to be working with people like Orla and Anne, who are also open to the realities of the situation that we all found ourselves in. And I'm very mindful of the fact that actors have their process and their way of getting from A to B. And there's a huge amount of work done in advance in terms of thinking how things are going to work for your character and what the important moments are. And they might be very personal and not so obvious and clear. So if we as directors come in, totally panicked and freaking out because we're running out of time and we still have this really important scene to do and it's never going to work the way we thought it was going to work because we just can't actually get the camera and the kiss from A to B in this forest because the surface of the forest floor is too uneven and we're being attacked by midges and we're losing the light, etc., etc. And you just want people to be open because you could be pulling the rug from under their feet. I mean, like for Orla and Anne, that's an incredibly delicate and important scene that in the script had its steps and stages, and suddenly it was reimagined at the last minute. So, you need a lot of things to work. You can be open to accidents, and we love creating spaces where those kind of accidents might happen, but you also need to be open, as Joe said, to the reality of actually what it means to try and shoot a film under pressure, and be very thankful that you're working with two such great actors who just then find what they need and put themselves into the place that they need to be to make it happen. And it was incredibly stressful, I have to say, in my memory.
You created that atmosphere as well. It's not always the case that you asked, if you remember in the rehearsal, you asked Anne and myself what we felt we needed, and we asked for quiet, essentially, just for sort of while we were shooting, and that became the case. I forgot about it. It's only after we finished I thought, oh, that all happened. It was just quiet and concentrated. And sets are frequently, even strangely with material like this, it's often just you're in the middle of exactly what you're talking about, people going, we can't get the track down, and so there's a lot of energy very near to you and a lot of noise and a lot of, we're used to working in it because they're the circumstances, but it was really thoughtful that you did create it, because it did make it, it just meant there were moments that it felt like you and I were the only two people in the world, Anne. Do you know what I mean? We were just alone and nothing else existed, and I could just be with you and absorb what was coming from you, which was a treat as well. But that atmosphere had to be created to be allowed for that to happen. So it was amazing.
I'll only say a little thing of like, that's what I feel like we all did, was we all knew, we were all clued in on the essentials of it. And I feel like that it seems so simple, but it's lost a lot. I feel like just the essentials, we all were on the same page of what is needed, I think, what we wanted to make.
That certainly comes across. And just to go back to what Joe was saying about that scene with Orla and Anne in it, and that quietness and restraint on that, have the space to be able to do that. I often ask people on this, like, how you worked on your chemistry, especially if it's a mother-daughter kind of scenario, but like the absence of that chemistry is a lot more, that lack of chemistry, but the coldness and the kind of severe kind of gap between you two is so profound in that moment before it kind of closes a little bit. It's really refreshing to hear that you had that space to work on it. How was it kind of shooting like that scene, let's say in the woods that day, as you said, mightn't have been as much time because of the car scene and stuff. How was that scene for you two, like in your acting process?
Funny, I don't remember there being a time constraint. Isn't that kind of terrible that I had the luxury of not remembering?
Yeah, which is them creating that, not making us aware.
Yeah, and I remember it's just like sitting on some like mossy logs kind of thing, and just we were able to exist, I think, in the scene for beforehand and after a bit. And yeah, no, I really just, I found it really, it's one of my favorite scenes to have shot in the entire film, and to watch as well, because I like that there is that stillness and I'm just listening to Orla, and my character's whole identity and world is being totally flipped, and it's catastrophic for her in that way. Like for me as an actor throughout this film, it's been about shifty wobbly identity stuff, you know, the sexual assault and the rape, I feel is not, it's not the thing that I've been thinking about throughout the process. It was the identity and the stakes of who she is as a person. And I think in that scene that was really what's that word, it's extremely important to me and the whole journey of everything for her. So
that certainly comes across. I mean, I'm going to come to the final scene at the moment, which I think is staggering. It's brilliant. But Stephen, just when you see a scene like that with the two of them in the woods and stuff as you're composing, I know you kind of went through your journey of how you found the kind of sound to it, but how do you react to something like that? I mean, as a composer, does it like give you a kind of sense of, you know, where you should be heading with this, or do you watch it first as kind of a viewer?
Well, watch the entire film first. And then, as I said, I tried to come to some understanding as to what the music should be doing. I mean, the one thing about the film is it's not sentimental. Doesn't mean that it's cold or unemotional. It's just not sentimental in the way that some films are, that they give up their answers easy or allow you off the hook. The film is about engaging you and getting you to think, and you know, there's so many non-verbal kind of signals and symbols in the film. They're constantly, you know, throughout the film, there's different meanings being suggested to you. So the one thing that I was aware of in the music is not to drop the ball, not to do something that was obvious. And in that regard, myself and Joe and Christine worked extremely closely together. I mean, they're in London, I'm here in Wicklow. I would write a cue, you know, mock it up, send it over to them. Within a few minutes, they'd be back and we'd be discussing it and changing it and fine tuning it. I mean, they were involved at a kind of at a molecular level. Every single note, every phrase, every move that the score was making, they were involved in shaping. So, I mean, they you know, without being facetious, they should almost be like co-composers. But they were that involved in it. I mean, Joe came up with the idea. It was a terrific idea of taking some elements of the score and just putting them in different places. Like, for example, when Anne's character is viewing the house, he said, you know, do you want to take some of the kind of the timpani notes and just stick them around, and that worked. And then we put them in the forest, and that worked again, and that brought another level, and it started. So, you know, it really was like a three-way thing. I mean, for like, I think we worked on the score for 2 months. I basically was fully immersed in it for 7 days a week for 2 months. That scene that you mentioned in the forest, there's actually no music on it. So that was a process of where do we have music? Where do we want music to be? What's it going to do? What's it going to be saying? You know, we were so detailed. Even the notes that the sopranos sang in it. You know, we were very careful about. She only did certain types of intervals. I think Joe and Christine said we don't want her doing any minor intervals because that just sounds religious, and they're absolutely right. And so that creates a kind of a challenge for the music. And then you think about how am I going to do that now? So it really was a fantastic process. I mean, that involvement of filmmakers is quite unprecedented. But you can see it in the film, you can see it in the dialogue and in the editing and in the sound design and in the mise en scène. It's there. So why would it not be in the music? And what I find about them, which is really unusual, is that control, that incredible control and involvement doesn't translate into rigidity. They're actually really open. So when I saw the film, they had tried a couple of things with sound, which was completely different than where the score went. Like, so, you know, I think Joe came over to my place initially to hear some ideas, and this idea of having a score, you know, with a soprano and timpani and flutes and horns and glockenspiels is so different, and they were completely open to it. You know, so it's quite unusual to have filmmakers that are that involved and that, you know, specific and yet completely open and flexible, which is really exciting. It was actually, for me, it was a fantastic score to work on, it really was. And then they would take a cue and go, that cue you put here, we've actually thrown it up here, see how it works. And that would start a whole new discussion on something else, which is great, because I don't know who said it. It's always been quoted that music is the highest art form. And I think the reason whoever said it, the reason they said it was that music works without a narrative. You can have, you know, instrumental music that will make you feel melancholic or sad or hopeless without a single word being spoken. I don't know where I'm going with this. Forgot what my point was going to be. Anyway.
But I think
Come back to it, Stephen.
I'll come back to it at some point.
Yeah.
I'll remember tomorrow.
That space that created, that allows people to kind of work within that, and like I think the ability to not, or that negative capability, if you want to call it that, is like so vital in kind of creating these spaces. We've got a good few questions here, so please do keep them coming in, and I'll come to them in a few minutes. But I just wanted to talk about that climactic scene. It's incredibly powerful and cathartic, I suppose, if we go back to the Greeks on this, and very claustrophobic. I'm just wondering first, Christy and Joe, how you went about kind of setting up for that scene with Orla and Aidan, and like what went into that, and then we'll come to Orla on that.
Can I just say one thing really quickly in response to what Stephen was saying?
Of course.
Really quickly, but we don't tend to go for backstory. So there's a lot of stuff of the characters, and particularly with this film, we just wanted a sense of these more archetypal characters that really chimed with the whole Greek story. So this sense of something being put in motion, and the archetypal father, the mother and the daughter, and that there's an inevitability about where we're heading. Even if you can't completely predict it exactly, you know that it's going to end badly for one of them. Or maybe it ends badly for all of them, or maybe, you know, whatever the conclusion is. And so in my mind, that allowed a real space for us to think about the music in terms of the editing and the storytelling, because it's not all completely pinned down to specifics, you know, about Peter Doyle and who he was, or Ellen and Rose / Judy. So I don't know whether you were thinking about that in your answer earlier on, but I just wanted to say it because that's something that was very much on our mind. You know, that it's part of that journey to that there's a lot of information withheld, and that we can flesh in for ourselves, and that the music isn't there to provide that. It's there to bring in a whole other layer of meaning to in a way to support the ideas about the narrative and the storytelling and how we're trying to tell this story and to help navigate people in that direction.
That's our
specifically that scene, which in a way, the reaction to that scene has been far more provocative than, I mean, in our mind, it was a mildly provocative scene, but in some situations we've been in, it's turned out to be much more than mildly provocative. Maybe outrageous or certainly polemical. I guess in a way, one of the interesting facts about it that maybe many listeners might not know is that we decided to shoot the scene without any rehearsing, that the two actors would never meet each other beforehand, that we would work out a choreography, that Aidan would come to a set, we would keep Orla in where she was in her caravan trailer thing, and he'd be brought to the car, orientated and mic'd up, brought back. Orla would be brought to the location, and still they would never meet. So the only time they would ever meet was the moment when Orla would get into the car, the camera would be rolling. And it's almost like something real that they have never, I mean, it would have been years before that they met each other. And this would be recorded as if it was like in the film. And because it's in a contained environment like a car, you can sort of pre-rig sound and camera and lights. And so you can kind of do it. And we proposed that to both Orla and Aidan, and they were more than happy, maybe a little tiny bit of trepidation, possibly. I don't know, Orla, what you might add to that. But it was a little bit of nerves. What it was funny, though, is that Orla did see Aidan the night prior to that in Tesco's in Back Street, and so she thought, I better go right back out again, just because that's going to mess up everything. It was an interesting thing to do, slightly nerve-wracking that the scene would be recorded for the very first time between the two of them, and of course it means that they're both ready to do that, and even if not much of that first take was used because of the camera position, some shots, the tension that was involved in that first take was there for the subsequent takes. And so it was we'd do it again, you know, it's an interesting thing to do. I don't know, Orla, would you like to add?
No, I was, you know, really excited about trying it because, look, there was a safety net, because you can, if it doesn't work for some reason, you can then resort to what you do, which is you talk through the scene and you know, maybe run lines and do it. So we had that recourse, but it did give, it did give that first take was, I remember hearing my heart. I remember hearing, because the first time we don't look at each other, Aidan and myself, for a long time. And then I turned to look at him, and when he turned and looked at me, it's in character, of course, and Aidan immerses in the character. So I just remember actually hearing and feeling my heart kind of thumping, which was glorious. I mean, I do have to say again, in general, that the lovely thing about the atmosphere that was created is both Anne and Aidan worked in the same way, which is just in a concentrated, quiet way. I mean, to this day, I barely know if Anne Skelly owns a phone. I never saw it, which is just amazing. Do you? Yay! And the same with Aidan. When we had done that first scene with all that heightened, you know, feeling, and of course we did it many times after that, I think, which is mainly what's in the cut, or several times afterwards. But at the end of the first scene, while you guys were all setting up outside the car, Aidan, rather nicely, because I just arrived, it was my first scene. And Aidan turned around and said, well, look, you know, how was the flight? And are you? And I said, you don't have to if you don't want to. And he went, oh, great. And we didn't talk after that because he didn't want to. He was being nice. But he liked working just quietly as well. And that's tended to be, wasn't it, Anne, the way we worked? It's kind of like it was all there in the actual lines, rather than talking forever around and about it. And it was more channeled into that. We were allowed to sit into it and just try to kind of nestle down into it and be there, weren't we?
Yeah, allowed some space and time, I suppose, which is rare commodity, I feel like. But and yeah, it's a sense of, I suppose, not to use a shitey actor word, but sacredness. But yeah, that it felt like, I suppose it also felt like it meant something to us all. With maybe I'm saying a lot of obvious things, but they were kind of that's special, I suppose. And one thing I really remember from doing scenes with Orla, I don't know why it just sticks out in my head from like this is what you remember years after you do a film, but like I really liked just listening to how syllables came out of your face. Like that was a if the experience of it, it all was refined down to really special little things.
And then just to pick up on one thing, because it's the word revenge is sometimes used around that scene. And I had never, and I think to this day, I haven't discussed this with Joe and Christine. So you may see it ticking off happening, but I had never seen it. I had seen it as an act of protection. I had seen it as the woman who finally becomes a mother and has to complete that which she has begun as an act of protection. And in doing so, asks for an acknowledgement of what happens from him. And as I said, it's an assisted suicide. It's not a.
Yeah. It's used in like the opening with the.
Yeah, but and I think you've talked about this, Christine, about the permission, the asking, the consent that is asked for in that way round, when it was never asked for the other way around.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, we've never seen it as a revenge film in that kind of clear-cut way. I mean, there's an aspect of something being resolved, and this is the way we decided that it would be resolved. It was really important to us that there were no outside agencies that take over, like the police or a courtroom drama scenario. This is what I said earlier. There's this sense that it's going to be resolved between the three of them. And at one stage in the writing process, we were thinking, well, who should do this? So we kind of moved it around. Rose, and there was also a moment at one stage, very early on, where Peter Doyle's character managed to kill or nearly kill Rose or Ellen. I can't remember, it's too many drafts ago and too many years ago. So we were moving around it and trying to understand it and get to a place where, we were happy with what was happening with the story and the journey of the characters. And this idea of Ellen becoming this protective mother figure who knows she has to step in because of what Rose might do became the thing that made the most sense to us. And also this question about consent, which is at the heart, obviously, of sexual assault and rape. And yet we didn't want that to be a distracting thing. So at no point did we want Peter Doyle to deny that he'd done it or say it wasn't rape and consent was involved. We just wanted all of that clear from the beginning. This is what happened. And now this is where we've gotten to. And that kind of abuse of power and imbalance of power is at the heart of it. And, going back to where we started, with Aisling Murphy, by all accounts, she fought really hard with her attacker, but there is an imbalance of power, and we wanted to explore that as well in the character. Ellen isn't a killer, and she doesn't want to kill this guy, and yet she knows that if she doesn't do something, her daughter Rose might do something, so she has to take that on, but she is reluctant, and at the end of the day, she's not strong enough to overpower this man because he's stronger than her. I mean, it can sometimes be as basic as that. There's the desire to cause harm, and we don't fully understand that at all, and we don't maybe address it enough with our young people. And then there's the strength, literally having the upper hand and being able to cause this damage because you're stronger than somebody, and you've you've picked on somebody who's, you know, less strong than you are. And we wanted all of those things in the mix, and how to place that, put that out there in the more delicate of ways.
What I really love about the fact that Ellen carries out that action of protection is, and it's not Rose who ends up succeeding, you know, like a heroine of a revenge film. She like is trying to fulfill a prophecy of what she thinks she's created for or something, and she's trying to work that out, and she's got anger in her and rage in her and upset in her, of course, but it's never, I never see it as an act of revenge, as Orla says about her own character, but I don't think it's an act of protection. She thinks that's her job or her role, and that's why she's connected to life in this way. And I think that what I find really interesting as an audience member of the film is recognizing that anger and feeling of there must be some way I can carry out a justice or self-defense, but you simply can't, even if you've done it before, say with the fire extinguisher, you know, those little moments of seeing this character live out what you wish that you could do. And she's trying to live out what she wishes she can do, and she can't do it. And there's something I feel really realistic about that in some other ways of like, even if you play out the scenario in your own head, if you're in those shoes and you're in that situation and you're playing it out, you're the hero in the story, and this is what I would do, and this is how I would react. The fact is, even watching the catharsis of cinema, even watching this point of failed action by Rose, it's true to life as well. If you know, you can't even be the hero in your own imagination in this kind of society or world, as a young woman without that kind of physical power.
Very, very well said, guys. I'm sorry I've kept you a little bit now, but I could literally talk to you about this film for another 2 hours. I won't, but we've got a good few questions in. I think you've answered them all, but apologies. Gunjan, who'd another good one in. Shane Martin, Lee Davies, I haven't got to yours. But I'm just going to wrap up with something from Ronan Tynan, not a question, more a statement. It just says, congratulations on a compellingly real and authentic film. I felt it actually had a documentary feel, which made it more dramatic, which seems counterintuitive. After Ashley Murphy's murder, I think it should be mandatory viewing, and I hope it reaches a very wide audience, because it can make people think and make a difference, which is a rare thing for any film. And I mean, that's something it does on top of many other things it does, but it really is a terrific film we've all contributed to, all of you here. So congratulations on that, and thank you so much for joining me today to discuss it.
Yeah, and thank you to the audience and the really good questions and contributions.
Thank you very much. It's been my absolute pleasure. Before we wrap up, guys, please join us again tomorrow at 2 p.m. We're going to be talking to Ruth Meehan, Jamalea Devereaux, Jean Pasley, and Siobhan Cullen from The Bright Side. Before Wednesday, when we're joined once again by wonderful Orla, along with Anthony Campbell and Colin Eastwood for Black Medicine. Thursday, we'll be talking to the team behind You're Not My Mother. And then Friday, we have a double header where we're talking to the people behind Zone 414 and Who We Love. So please do tune in for those. Keep an eye on IFTA. But just once again, if you're tuning in here, I assume you have seen Rose Plays Julie. If you have, please tell your friends to find it. Where can we see it at the moment, guys? I believe it's on like Amazon Play and Google Play as well.
BFI Player here in the UK, Amazon, iTunes, Google Play. It's going to be on the IFI Player very soon. So, and then DVD and Blu-ray. Brilliant.
Like if you were as moved by it and as haunted and stay with you as much as stay with me and by all accounts, everyone involved with it, please do tell your friends to buy it or rent it online, or buy physical copies if you can. It really is a terrific and powerful film, and I can't wait to see what you guys do next. Thank you very much. Orla, Brady, and Skelly, Joe Lawlor and Christine Molloy. Thank you so much for taking the time today, and thank you for your film.